we're going to look at factoring polynomials, part 2. Okay, so we're going to look at the steps for factoring polynomials, specifically quadratics, and we're going to do 4 examples. So your success criteria, you've got it if you can factor out a GCF, like we learned in the last video, and then factor a trinomial into 2 binomials. So we're going to take a quadratic in 3 terms and turn it into 2 binomials of 2 terms. Okay? So let's remind ourselves, factoring is the opposite of multiplying polynomials, right? It's the opposite process. So let's look at an example of multiplying polynomials just so we get the process back in our head and we can see the connection to the factoring steps. So if I wanted to multiply out x plus 2 times x plus 4, I would distribute my x to both terms. So I'd get x times x, which would give me x squared, x times 4, which would give me 4x, 2 times x, which would give me 2x, and 2 times 4, which would give me 8. I almost put 8x. So just our 8 there, okay? Now we can simplify that down, and we can see we have 2 like terms here in the middle. 4x plus 2x would give us 6x plus 8, okay? So now factoring is the process of starting with this problem and trying to go backwards to get to our 2 binomials. So quadratic trinomial and then 2 binomials. Okay? So I've got to think about, where did these numbers come from? Well, if we look, x squared came from this first multiplication. The first 2 terms in the parentheses were multiplied to give us that x squared. Right? 8 came from the last 2 numbers being multiplied. 2 times 8 gave us that 8. Those didn't have to combine with any like terms, okay? We just did the multiplication and we had our term. The middle term, however, 6x, came from combining 2 multiplications together. It came from combining our x times our 4 and then our 2 times the x. So these 2 outside multiplications and 2 inside. So let me color code that a little bit. So when we did the 2 outer ones multiplied together and the 2 inner ones multiplied together, that gave us this 6x. So we're going to use that process to help us out. So we multiplied and then we had to add. So that's what we want to think about, multiplying and adding. So I can think here, I need 2 things multiplied to give me x squared, right? Well, those 2 things have to go in the first parentheses, and a lot of times you can just kind of see the pattern that it's going to be x times x. Okay, now I know that these last 2 numbers have to multiply to give me 8, right? That's what we see up here. Has to multiply to give me 8. And so you may go, oh, 2 and 4, but remember, those weren't the only options, okay? 8 could be 2 times 4. It can also be 1 times 8. So how do we know which one is right? Right? That's where that middle term comes into play. We know that when I multiply the outer and the inner pieces, they should combine to get our middle term 6x. So if I had a 1 and an 8 here, I would get, let me write that in. If I tried this, because x times x is x squared, 1 times 8 is 8, but I tried to get my middle term, that'd be x times 8 would give me 8x. 1 times x would give me 1x. And that would give me 9x, which is not 6x. Okay? So that's why your middle term is important. It helps you pick which factors are correct. If I tried the 2 and the 4, we can see that multiplies to give me 8 still. But then I'd get a 4x and a 2x like before, and then I have my 6x. So this is the process that we're going to go through. We'll list out steps, and then we'll do some examples. Okay, your first step should always be to look for a GCF. If you can find a GCF and factor it out, you're going to simplify your problem. Sometimes that's all you can do, okay? After you check for GCF, if you still have a quadratic, right, if you still have the x squared, then you're going to move forward, okay? You are going to set up your template and split your quadratic term, your first term. So what I mean by template is the parentheses, which I'll show you in a minute, okay? Then after you split up the first term, you'll list your factors for your constant, your third term, okay? And then step 4 is you're going to check your little term, linear term, check your middle term, your second term. So first term, third term, then middle term. Okay, so let's try example 1. First step is to check for a GCF. So I'm going to look here. Does this problem have a GCF? All right, let's see, they're both divisible by 2 and x. So let's divide by 2x, which is our GCF. So that's going to give me 2x in front. Remember, when you're factoring, you're just separating it. And then if I divide this, my 2's cancel. X squared over x is just x. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and then my x's cancel. So if I look here, 2x, not quadratic. X plus 3, not quadratic. You have to have the squared to be quadratic. So since we have no more quadratics, we are done. So sometimes you just have a GCF problem, and that's fine. Let's look at example 2. Do we have a GCF? I think we do. They're all divisible by 3. They don't all have an x, so we can't divide by x. So I'm going to put my GCF in front and do my division. Oops, sorry, I meant to do that in black. Here we go. So that's going to, 3's cancel, give me x squared. 12 divided by 3 is 4x. And then negative 36 divided by 3 is negative 12. So I just divided out my GCF, okay, and got my new problem. Now look. We have a squared. We are still quadratic. So that means that we need to continue with our factoring. This is fully factored. This one is not. All right? So we need to take this quadratic here and factor it with the rest of our steps. X squared plus 4x minus 12. We'll bring that 3, our GCF, we'll bring it into our final answer. But for right now, I just want to focus on the quadratic that's left. So first step, or the next step says to set up your template. What I'm talking about is your parentheses. We know we want to factor it into 2 binomials. So I'm going to put parentheses to remind me I should have a binomial and a binomial. Okay? And when you set up your template, you should also split up your first term. So x squared, what multiplies to be x squared? X times x. Okay? Next step, list factors for your constant. What are all the factors for negative 12? Okay. We've got 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Now we've got, I think I need a multiply to be negative. All right. So how many negatives do you need to multiply to be negative? Well, you need at least 1 negative and 1 positive. All right. So that means one of these numbers has to be negative. But keep in mind, we don't know which one. It could be the 1 or it could be the 12. It could be the 2 or it could be the 6. So if you need to move your negative to make your problem work, that's fine. Okay, now we've got to think through which one of these numbers is going to help me get our second term, our middle term here, a 4. And if you're not sure, just try it out. So remember that middle term comes from multiplying the outside and the inside together. So x times this number over here, right? So we'll have some number x, and then x times this number here, added together, has to give me 4x. So x times something plus x times something equals our middle term. So I just kind of laid out a template here to help me play around with it. So if I try this first with negative 1 and 12, I can see that negative 1x plus 12x is not 4x. Right? That's 11x. So that one doesn't work. Even if I switch the negative, right? Positive 1 and negative 12 is still not 4. So that's what you're trying to think through. You don't have to do a total guess, okay? You can look at your numbers and kind of play around with them. Negative 2 and 6, let's try that. Negative 2 and 6, is negative 2 and 6 positive 4? It is. So x times negative 2 and x times 6, a positive 6, gave us our answer of 4x. If you're ever unsure if you did your work correctly, you can always multiply your answer back out and see if you get your original problem. Now we're only missing one thing here, and that's our GCF. Make sure you bring that down in your final answer. So x times x gave us the x squared. 6 times negative 2 gave us the negative 12. And when we checked here, we got a negative 2x, a 6x, and that gave me 4x when I combined. So that's your process. Let's try it again. Okay, first step, do I have a GCF? I see I have a 2 in front, but 13 is not divisible by 2. They don't all have x's, so no GCF. So that's okay, you just move on to setting up your template. So I'm going to set up my parentheses. All right, and split up my first term, so be careful here. 2x squared, all right? What multiplies to be 2x squared? Well, it can't just be x and x, right? X times x gives me x squared. So I've got to think about what multiplies to be 2, and that's going to be 2 and 1. So I can do 2x and 1x, or just x. So when you have a coefficient in front that's not a GCF, right, up here, we had a coefficient, but it was a GCF, so it didn't affect our quadratic here. We were able to ignore it for a little while and just put in our final answer. But we can't ignore this one. All right, it has to go inside our parentheses because it's part of our quadratic. Okay? But the steps are the same. So split up my first term, 2x times x is 2x squared. Now look at your 6. You need to list your factors of your 6. So what are factors of 6? 1 and 6, and 2 and 3. I don't have any negatives, so I'm not even worried about putting anything negative, right? I want it all positive. So now I've got to figure out, will it be 1 and 6 that will get me the 13x, or a 2 and a 3 that will give me the 13x? This one might be a little bit harder to think through just by looking at it, so I like to set up a template again. Remember, it's going to be 2x times this number, right, plus x times this number. So 2 times something plus something times x. So 2x times something, right? So 2x times something. And then x times something, and that has to give me 13x. Okay, I need to multiply something by 2 and add another number to it. So let's see, let's try 1 and 6. If I put a 1 and a 6 here, let's think through it. 2 times 1 is 2x. 6 times x is 6x. That would give me 8x. That doesn't work. Now, before I move on to the next one, I've got to think, do I want the 1 multiplied to 2, or should I try the 6 being multiplied to 2? Let's try the 6. 2 times 6 gives me 12. 1 times x gives me 1x, and there we go. There is our 13x. So we need a 2 times a 6 plus a 1, and that's how we use that 1 and 6. Be very careful where you put it in your problem, though. I need 2 times 6. Well, remember, this 2 is being multiplied over to this side, so my 6 would need to go on that side. And that was a positive 6. And then an x times 1, so my 1 would go here. Okay? And there's no GCF to put in front, so there's your final answer. Those are your factors of your quadratic. 2x times x gives me 2x squared. 1 times 6 gave me 6, and we got the 13x by checking our middle term. 2x times 6 gave me 12x. X times 1 gave me 1x, and together that gives me my 13x. All right, let's try one more. So example 4, x squared minus 6x minus 16. Let me help you start your template here. Start your template with your parentheses and split up your first term. So x squared is x times x. And take a minute and see if you can get a final answer. Okay, so let's see if you were correct. So I first need to find my factors of negative 16. And negative 16 could be 1 and 16, 2 and 8, or 4 and 4. If I want to multiply to be negative, I need 1 negative and 1 positive. So I'm going to put a negative in there to remind myself. Okay, and I need to combine my middle term to get a negative 6. So that is going to be a negative 8 and a positive 2. And you can check that by looking at what you're multiplying. X times 2 will give me 2x. Negative 8 times x would give me negative 8x. And that would give me a negative 6x. So your final answer here is x minus 8, and x plus 2. Those are your factors of your quadratic.